Okay, well, I'm going to start talking. It's almost 11:05, so 5 minutes past. I think, yeah, there were a lot of people that bookmarked this and RSVP'd, but there's so much going on, so many good options to choose from. So we'll get started now, in the interest of having lots of time to use for the discussion and providing sort of more content for the people who come back later to watch the video. Um, but yeah, this is not so much a like a talk where I have, something that I am just presenting. I mean, I guess I'm presenting something, but I'm hoping this will be more of a conversation, where we can just kind of, I can share something that is an approach that I'm using. And I'm really open to hearing questions and observations and criticisms. I'm really interested in how uh, you might have done this differently, how you might do it better, or how you've done it in the past, and talking through the whys of why you did it a different way, and what could be done better. So I'm coming at this not necessarily as an expert telling you this is the way to do it, but coming to this as somebody who's figured this out on my own. And now I'll actually show two implementations, which I on two different sites. Ooh, the balloons, that's cool. And they're very different. So um, I think that I hope that this will be a conversation where we all grow and learn and find better ways to do things in general, together as a community. And I'm all about the community coming together and deciding the best practices. So before I launch too deep into all that, I'll introduce myself just a little bit. So my name is Brenton Strine. Thank you for coming to my session. My background is in traditional programming, specifically front-end web development. I actually taught myself how to code starting way back in high school. And because I did not join a community and because I didn't actually go through any formal education, it took me about 8 years, honestly. I started in high school, and throughout high school, I was spending most of my free time, instead of doing my homework, building websites. And then I did the same thing in college. I don't know why I didn't major in computer science. That would have been a no-brainer. But I didn't. And so again, through college, I spent all my free time building websites, learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And I highly do not recommend learning a new technology by yourself like I did. It'll take you 8 years, take you longer than 8 years. Highly recommend getting together with a community, finding a mentor, finding, your people. And that's why I'm a big advocate of community now. But anyway, after graduating, my undergrad degree was not employable, but my pastime of building websites was very employable. And so I got a job at Citrix Online as a front-end web developer. And from that point on, my career was made. Very high demand skills. And so I've been building websites now for 25 years. And most of my career has been at very large sort of enterprise scale companies with tens of millions of users. So I've worked at Citrix, I've worked at NASA, I've worked at Amazon, and then most recently I worked at MailChimp as a front-end web developer, where I actually, at MailChimp, they kind of forced me to move from front-end to full stack. So I was just a full stack software engineer, actually became mostly a back-end developer at MailChimp against my will. And about 2 years ago, I left MailChimp to found Kicky. Kicky is my startup. We provide software tools for artists to run their business. And you can see a painting from one of our artists on the wall behind me. And I thought that when I founded Kicky, I was going to build it with, sort of like a Node React traditional code stack. But as I was exploring options and looking at the costs and the time it would take for one developer or hiring a developer, I kept getting pointed back to Bubble, and I kept looking at Bubble and dismissing it because I thought that it was a no-code tool. I'm a programmer. I don't need to fuss with something like that. No-code would never be powerful enough. But people kept directing me back to Bubble, and I kept trying it a little bit more and still wasn't getting it. And at some point I got it enough that it clicked, and I thought, well, I'll give this a try. and thought, well, maybe I'll build the MVP in Bubble, and kept not finding the edge of what's possible in Bubble. And so at some point realized Bubble is the future, and we're going to build Kicky entirely in Bubble. And now I am a huge Bubble enthusiast. Really, really believe in the future of Bubble. I've watched the internet change over 25 years. Like I've said, I've seen it go through different sort of evolutions and watch different epochs come and go. And I truly believe the next epoch in the internet is programming on platform, which is my term for what Bubble is. So if there's ever a non-Bubble competitor that does the same thing, which right there now there aren't, I'm going to call that those programming on platform. So I also am the founder of RefCode, which is a nonprofit that based here in Atlanta that helps refugees. By the way, refugees from all over the world resettle here in Atlanta. So that's why you might be wondering, why are the refugees in Atlanta? It's a resettlement site. We help refugees start careers in software engineering through education and mentorship and community. And then I'm also the founder of a little project called Codeless Love, which I'll maybe talk about a little bit later. So diving in now, we're 10 minutes in. Kicky is an incredibly complex website. So I knew from the outset that we would need artists and patrons. And so that's two user types. And I also knew we would need admins. So I initially, let me actually share the sort of horrible approach that I initially started out with. I'm going to share my screen. And so this is a snapshot I took of an older version of Kicky. This is the sort of version 3. We're on version 4 now. And if you look at the user here, I had something called is admin, yes or no, because I wanted to have admin features because part of what we were doing was actually renting artwork out. And so we needed to generate work orders, and there was a lot of administrative stuff. So is admin was there. So I could check if the user was an administrator and kind of give them access based off of that. Then I also had user type. And let's get to them. Now you'll see I've got 1, 2, 3 named type at this point. And I think at one point there was a 4th one. Now, why would a website need 4 different types of user type? It's because I kept building a user type. And so I'd start with an artist and then a patron. And I was working with it for a while and it wasn't working. And so I would build a new type to try to solve the issues. And this kept happening. So, and then I deprecate the old one and then build a new one. And as I was making these mistakes, I found that it was very difficult to get rid of the old type because the type was granting access to features. So I had to kind of maintain all of these types simultaneously. And over time, what I finally realized the problem is that when you're granting access to features by user, whenever you add a new user type, you have to go back to every single feature on the website and update access to that feature in every single place that feature appears. And so it made it very, very difficult to maintain the access at all. So we started out with just artists and patrons. Then we needed installers who were going to actually be doing the installing. Then we needed artist advisors. And we just kept adding more and more types of users. And every single one of those, I would basically have to go back to the whole site and review every single feature and do an audit. And I would invariably make mistakes, miss things, and it was just chaos. And so what I realized we need to do is switch from guarding around user type to guarding around the feature itself, and then give users line item access to the features. So the benefit there is that you only need to update permissions you only need to update the permissions when you're working on the feature. So when you're creating a new feature, you update the permissions. Or if you go back and edit a feature, you just think about the permissions in that moment. And you can then grant and remove access to that feature with the permission very, very easily. Another great thing is that you can grant a permission by putting the permission on a user's account. And then if you realize that it's broken or it's not done, like maybe it's a beta feature, you can revoke permission by just taking that permission of that feature off. So this gives you the way a way of releasing beta features to a subset of your users, and you can even A/B test and things like that. And then if you find that you have the feature that you like, you've kind of solidified on it, then you can grant it more broadly. So there's a lot of power there. And then another really cool thing that you can do is it allows you to grant custom, allows users to set up custom roles. So we're able to set up seats. And if you look up here, I've created custom roles where you click on this and you grant from the permissions that you want to give. And this is a user doing this, and they can set up access to their account, line item access, as detailed as you would like to let your users give. And then the last thing is it really helps with setting your privacy settings, because you can set your privacy settings based off of sort of intrinsic values, like maybe this user just doesn't have access to a certain feature because of the state of the app or the state of the data, but also based off of what features they have access to. And it gives you a really clean way to go through your privacy settings and just make sure that the privacy set, every single data type is taking into account which features need access to it. So it's really, really helpful there. So before I show you the Kicky implementation, I'm going to actually move over to this website and show a simpler implementation. This is the Codeless Love website, by the way. I mentioned this earlier. This is something that's still kind of in stealth mode, so you're getting a sneak peek preview here of what I would like to eventually become a sort of source for where we as the Bubble community can come together and discuss and publish our best practices and worst practices. So that's what this is. It's a place where you come and you propose a practice or a pattern, and you say this is a good practice or a bad practice, and then the community kind of decides, is this an official recommendation? We propose this as good, or we propose this as bad. And so part of this is, if you come into a particular item here, is different users have different access. So if you own a practice that you're the author of, you can edit it. But if you don't own it, you can't edit it. However, if you're an editor, you can not only edit it, but you can accept the proposal. So in other words, you can turn it from a proposal to a recommendation. And so there's some complicated user access stuff there. And this was my second implementation of the feature access. And so let me show you what I did. First off, I made a list of permissions. This is an option set. And the permissions are deeply tied to the function of the site. So I really think it should be an option set. And I heard some disagreements on that from some people I've talked to about this before. So I'd love to hear you chime in if you disagree, and we can talk through why. But this is, for example, proposal submit means you can submit a proposal. And I put kind of like what the thing is first to make it easier to find in the privacy settings. So this is a data type, and you have the access to submit it. And then practices, you can modify the guidance status of a practice. You can modify alternative approaches. You can modify child practices. So you can make it as detailed or as broad as you want it to be. And then I'll show some privacies. Let's look at a proposal, since we were just talking about that. Or actually, let's look at a practice. So in here, by the way, I use accounts. So like I can change users. So current user's account, you can put permission directly on the user if you wanted to. Current user's permissions contains this particular permission, then you grant their permission. So it's very easy to go through and make sure that you grant all those permissions and set up your privacy rules really cleanly. Now, how do I decide how to grant these? How do I make it easy to grant these? Because you could end up with hundreds of permissions. Well, one thing that I landed on was having a permission and then a permission user type. And this is in a little bit going back to that old method of having a type. But this is really for simplifying things mentally for me. This is not necessary, but it's just easier for me to think in terms of user types. So I have commenters, contributors, editors, administrators, and I might add more types in the future. But this is not exposing me to all of the problems of the old method because I'm not actually directly checking the type. I'm checking the permission. But each permission, if you come in here and open it up, knows which user types have access to it, if that makes sense. So you can come in the option set and you can manually update which permissions go with which user types. And so this gives us all those advantages where if I come in the future and I add a new user type, I invent a new one, I don't have to go through the entire site and rethink which features does this have access to and modify thousands of conditions potentially. I just go top to bottom on my list of permissions and I add or don't add that particular user type to that particular permissions sort of attribute here. And then I'm done. And if I want to change which features a user type has access to, it's all done right here. So here's my simple user types here, and then they connect to the permission. I'm going to pause just a moment because I feel like I've now laid out the basics of kind of like what this is about. And I want to give a chance for any questions, comments, feedback before I keep going. I also want to make sure that my mic is working and I haven't just been talking for an hour and nobody can hear me and nobody's there.
This is a really cool approach, Brent. It's really cool to see how you're using the option sets. Yeah, I'm curious to see how you're implementing it on the like design and app level.
Cool. Yeah, let me drill into that. Share my screen again. So let's start here again with the Codeless Lab website, which is simpler implementation. Oh, I see a chat. All good. Okay, cool. So let's actually look at a page here. And so this is the practice page. This is where you can either read about a practice that's been submitted, or edit a practice that you have edit access to. And like we could drill in, I think here's a save button. We have just a very simple condition on that save button that hides or shows it. This current user's permissions does not contain edit this practice, then you hide it. So it's pretty simple. You can set these up anywhere you want to. So it could be here at this level. It could also be at the workflow level, which I don't even know if I bothered to put it on the workflow level because I'm very, intentional about setting up good privacy rules. So even if somehow the button were for some reason to be visible, or if somebody were to go in and directly edit the JavaScript request, the request would fail because privacy permissions don't allow it. And so this is a really simple, clean way to block and show access. And it's just kind of always available on the user directly. So I'm going to go into how we did things with Kicky. And Kicky was the first implementation, which is part of why it was so much more complicated. Things are always more complicated when you're trying to figure it out. But also Kicky is a more intense website. So we have feature-based access for our users. We have a freemium plan where we want to show the user the feature, but show them a little paywall that says you don't have access to this feature. Here's why you don't have access to it, and here's how you can upgrade. And it gets more complicated than that. We wanted to actually restrict access based on their usage. So for example, I'm going to open this up. We have a little task manager if artists are keeping track of stuff they need to do on their team. Now, the free plan has a limited number of tasks that you can use. So you have access, but that access is revoked after you've created a certain number of tasks. And so we needed to find a much more robust way to block access dynamically. And I want to show you the kind of what I built here. So I've actually, for Kicky, I've categorized it into features, feature sets, and plans. So there's 3 tiers. Now, a plan is kind of the top level thing. So we've got the base plan for artists, the free plan, the super plan, a custom add-on. We've got Kicky team. We've got everything. This is basically super admin. We've got patrons who don't have access to anything except being able to buy art. And I can very easily and dynamically create new plans here. A plan is a collection of feature sets. Now, there's a lot of complexity here of like upgrading and downgrading, but you just add the feature set that you want to grant all the features. So it's the same sort of thing as what we were seeing in the Codeless website, but a little bit more complicated. And a feature set is nothing more than a collection of features. So that's the bottom tier. And so that just makes it easier to move large numbers of features around. We did one other really interesting thing where we created, I'll just go to it right now. We created a reusable called a paywall. Oh, I'm in version 3. I need to update to main. So the paywall is a little reusable that you can drop into any page, and it will look at all of this stuff and figure out what the user's access is based on their permissions, their team's permissions, because remember, they might be being granted permissions from a seat, and other things, and it'll dynamically kind of give you the notification that'll tell you what your status is. And the paywall will only block your features if you don't have access. And so this, when you put a paywall on a page, the way it works is the paywall does the work of figuring out if the user has access, and then it puts in, let's see, I think it's in a parameter. Yeah, here it is forbidden. So the paywall sets this parameter is forbidden to yes or no. And so now the page can just look at that is forbidden to know whether or not the access is granted, because sometimes the logic is much more complicated than does the user have this permission. There's all those other things I mentioned. And so the reusable, this paywall reusable, does all that work and provides the conclusion back up to the parent page. And then the parent page just looks at the reusable to determine whether the user has access. I'm going to take a minute just to see if anybody has any other thoughts or comments, questions. I'd love to hear disagreements or better approaches. I'd love to hear alternate approaches. How have you done it differently? You didn't know that you were going to be asked to talk here. Okay, so what can I talk about for the last 3 minutes? What else should I show? I could honestly talk about this for much, much longer. I'll show an example of what this looks like. So let's go to that task manager again. This is the much more complicated version, by the way. And so enforced login is just a reusable that hides the page until they log in, and it shows a pop-up. And in here, right in here somewhere, there's the paywall. So right here, here's the paywall. It is hidden by default. And it shows itself when it knows that it needs to become visible, because so normally it only shows itself when the user doesn't have access, and you get this little, let me see if I can actually, I might be in a state where I can show it. You get a little lock icon and an explanation of why you don't have access to that feature. I have to be logged in. I'm not set up, but you get a little lock icon right here. And it says you don't have access to this feature. So you get that, but then also the button itself will disable itself based on that. So that's the first thing. But there are times when you do have access where the paywall lock shows up and it'll say you're approaching your limit. You're 90% of your way through the number of tasks that you're allowed to use. So it's a little warning. It doesn't disable things yet. So that's why this is showing its visibility based off of the is visible setting rather than based off of the is forbidden setting. And the way this works is you pass in as a data source the feature. So here I'm passing in the option set feature task management. So I'm telling it, tell me if I have access to if this user has access to this feature. And you also can pass in optionally some other things like the number of um, uses of that feature if there happens to be a limit. We also have tiers, which I didn't have a chance to get into, but the same feature could have multiple tiers. So, for example, Task Manager is a great option. The free tier has a limit. The base tier has a much larger limit, and then there's also an unlimited tier. So for the same feature, you might have different tiers available. And so we made it really complicated. I said there's sort of like 3 levels of feature set, and plan. There's actually 4 because it's feature tiers below that: feature tier, feature set, and then plan. So you can make this incredibly complicated, or you can make it, oops, I went the wrong direction, or you can make it very simple as we have it here. So really would love to hear any feedback from y'all. I'm going to try to end it right at 11:30 on the dot. And if anyone else wants to stay after this 11:30 and kind of ask questions, I'm totally good. Otherwise, everybody log off and I'll see you around. And come to the bubble retreat in Atlanta next month. It's at it's not popcode. It's at split.fund/f/bubble-retreat-ticket. So I see a question from Paul. He said, have you used this approach anywhere else? No, I've not. I've shown you the 2 places I've implemented it so far. At MailChimp, we did a sort of like traditional code version of this called feature flagging, but that's in code and it's very, very different than Bubble. Okay, log off if you're gonna not ask questions, or if you're gonna stay on, ask a question. I'm only gonna stay on as long as people are here. Maybe they've all gone and gotten their coffee for coffee break. Cool. I think everybody's logging off. All right, thank you all. I'll talk to you later. Bye.